Ohio State gave up 392 yards and 31 points to Oregon State, which is the worst team in the history of the Power Five. Tim Bielek, how worried are you about Ohio State's defense going forward to Rutgers, TCU, Penn State in a month? 10 is super worried. Everybody freak out. 1 is no big deal.
I say a 7, and I do have a couple caveats that kind of have me in that way. Number one, Jordan Fuller was out with a hamstring injury, so that obviously affected things. So you put your third safety, Jocelyn Wint, into the starting lineup next to Isaiah Pryor is already new. And you also have, including those guys, 4 new starters in the back seven of that defense, which I said on the podcast earlier this week was my biggest concern was what they were going to do. But still, Oregon State, they did some nice things. They ran some screens pretty well, but still, giving up almost 400 yards of offense to a team like this, not a very good sign. The 2 long touchdowns at the start of the third quarter were just not very good plays at all that were made. You can chalk a lot of it up to an inexperience, and like I said, starting 2 new guys at that safety position, which is so important. It's the quarterback of the defense. They have to be able to really run everything back there, and that's where you miss Jordan Fuller, a guy that all he did last year was just make sure tackle after sure tackle.
7, Jordan Fuller is a big loss. There were some bad angles and looked like some slow foot speed chasing down some of those guys who were running away. Felt like Jordan Fuller might have gotten some of those guys. He's a 7, and by the way, he was right on the podcast. What to be worried about? Back 7. We said the offensive line. Offensive line was fine. What do you got?
I'm at like a 5. I'll say a 5. They're young on the back 7 that Tim was talking about. I think it's okay to play young guys and then sort of live with this kind of thing. We saw Oregon State do what a lot of teams do to Ohio State, and that's use Ohio State's aggressiveness against itself. That defensive line is so good and so disruptive that you have to have a good screen game. That's the only way you're going to get yards. So I'm not too hung up on that. I'm hung up on the angles. Jordan Fuller changes that. I thought you missed Tuff Borland in this game. He played in I think it was the first quarter, a couple snaps. A few of those long runs, you just saw Baron Browning kind of go into the wrong gap. His first time playing middle linebacker. I think that's excusable for the first game. I feel a little – we were talking the other day about how we feel good about Bill Davis because of the guys he's playing. I think he played the right guys but didn't necessarily play well, so I don't feel as sure about Bill Davis now as I felt a week ago when we figured out the depth chart. But I don't think it's anywhere near panic mode yet. I think it's a lot of youth and a lot of guys trying to make a play and being a little over-aggressive.
Can we take back the thing we said about Bill Davis, not being worried about Bill Davis? What did you guys say, 7 and what, 5? Yeah, I'm like a 6. I do think I talked to Alex Grinch, the co-defensive coordinator, a lot after the game. That idea. Pete Warner's young. Baron Browning's young. You picked him to start. You could have picked older guys. You must know you have to live with some of this, but you think there's upside out there. And he was like, yeah. And I sort of said, like, you won by 1 million. You covered. Like, whatever. Are we supposed to freak out because you gave up 31? And he was like, he's not going to say that exactly, but also sort of, yeah. They're young. But it gets late early, or it gets early late, meaning that, like, we know they're young. TCU's coming in 2 weeks no matter how young you are. Yeah. There's no preseason in college football, right? So, like, Michigan's playing Notre Dame. So that wouldn't have worked against Notre Dame. It's good they played a crappy team because they had some glaring defensive mistakes here and there. I don't think it's a big deal, but also, like, you can't be young by Penn State. You can't be young on September 29th. So will Baron Browning and Pete Werner and some of the young defensive tackles who were in there are going to have to play, and that second Isaiah Pryor, are they going to be done being young by Penn State? They have to be. I think they will, but I'm not sure. And I take it back about Bill Davis. I'm really worried about anything he has to do with. Bill Landis, Tim Bielek, Doug Maurice. More coverage coming at cleveland.com.